Alright guys, welcome to your tutorial. Okay, so this is as close as it's going to get to having your one-to-one in preparation for your STAR. I'd like you guys to watch this, not just once, a couple of times even, several times, 3-4 times, as many times as you need in preparation for your STAR. So the idea behind this, again, is just to be as a review. It doesn't cover necessarily every single type of question you're going to go over, but it's going to cover a good chunk, and as time goes on, I'll put more of these together so that we cover a wider range of material. So this is going to be our 8th grade Spiral Practice STAR review. So keep in mind, we've actually already worked these out together, but the hard part isn't teaching, the hard part is you retaining. So I want you to go over this to retain what you have learned. So this is going to be your Spiral Practice 1 through 20, Part 1. Hopefully I'll be able to make more parts. And then just a heads up, since I know you guys will be doing this from home, I'll be using these materials. I'll have the TI-84. If you have one of those, great. If not, no worries. You can go and search a Wabbit EMU. So that little rabbit icon. If you go and Google Wabbit EMU, it'll take you to a way to get a free download for the TI-84. If you follow the steps there, it'll work. If you have Android-based phones as well, you can get the TI-84 on your phone. For Apple users, it's not exact, but it's actually pretty close. They finally made an app, from what I can tell, for the TI-84. This is the free version. If you just search Calculator X on your App Store, the way this calculator works is almost the exact same thing as your TI-84 that we use in class. However, it's the free version. I do believe there's a Pro or something like that. It costs $5, but it's worth it for $5. I mean, as you use it for homework and stuff like that, it will be worth it. And then if you're my student, you should also have one of these, which I created for you. And as you use it more and more, it should be very helpful for you. Make sure you have one of these and you know how to use it. Just keep in mind, when you eventually test, what's in black and white is all you're going to have. You're going to have to, out of memory or out of just pure learning, you're going to have to add all the stuff in blue for you to do better. So I'll refer to a lot of the keywords here from your reference charts, but again, remember, it's only going to be in black and white. You're going to have to know all the extra stuff that I put in there in blue. Okay, so hopefully this tutorial helps you guys. If there's anything I need to fix or some stuff I need to add to it, leave comments there. I might or might not check them, since a lot of people just leave hate comments. If you don't like it, go watch something else. But hopefully this will help you for what you need. Alright, so it's just going to be me explaining a whole bunch of problems. It's not going to be the most exciting video, but it is going to be a very helpful video. I want this to be a way for you guys to remember the stuff I've taught you. So what else is going to help other than practicing a bunch of random problems? Alright guys, so just stay through it. I wouldn't watch it all in one sitting, especially because it's extremely long. But if you want to watch it over the course of a few days and then keep on rewatching it in preparation, this ought to be a good review for you. Okay, so if the area of a square is 88 units squared, on which number line does S represent the side lengths of a square? So keywords here is that you have the area of a square, that's the inside, and you should know that a square has 4 equal sides. And then I'm looking for S, the side. So what I can tell you right now is we're going to take the approach that we want to use our answer choices to our advantage, good test taker strategies. 44 is too big. See, if I were to do 44 to get the area, you'd be doing 44 times 44, which is way too big of a number. So what I'm thinking here, what we have to be looking for is which one of these is a possible answer. Now again, that's using our answer choices to our advantage. If I do that, the answer is C. And then how do I get that? Well, easy way to check is 9.3 times 9.3. What's 9.3 times 9.3? And notice I get really close to my 88. Now if I go check the others, here's 8.9. Notice what 8.9 gives me. 8.9 times 8.9. That would only give me an area of 79, even further from the 88 that I want to get. And then 7.5 was answer choice A. So if I check that, 7.5 squared, which is the same thing as 7.5 times 7.5, takes me even further from the 88. And then I already told you 44 was off, but if you check that, it's incredibly off. So the closest is 9.3. Now, the right approach that we should take when we're solving this is the keywords is area and square. That should make me just simply take the square root of 88. And if you take the square root of 88, that takes you really, really close to 9.3. So if I simply just take the square root, which is the approach I'm hoping you will notice first, that's how I get to 9.38 and then dot, 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 dot. But it's rounded really close to 9.3. Okay, so moving on. On this one here, you find yourself a keyword, and the keyword for me is going to be unit rate. It could even be a per recipe, which still means unit rate. And we should know that the word unit rate, the per one, is another word for rise over run. So as I go and find my rise over run, it's pretty basic. Just remember some of the details to watch out for. You always want to make sure you get perfect points that are on the line and the grid, and then be careful with the scale. Right now, these scales here, they're going by ones, so there's nothing tricky, but it could happen that they don't always go by ones, so you want to watch out for that. So the origin's a good point, and then I can go find another one, and I'm seeing this point. Now, there may be more, there probably is, but you only need 2. Now, if you keep on going, that's fine, but as far as what I have, my rise up and down is 5, and my run side to side is 2. And 5 over 2 can be simplified to 2.5, or rather change to a decimal. In fact, both answers are correct. My answer could be 5 over 2. I could leave the answer like that, or I could change it to a decimal, and it would mean the same thing. In this case, it was changed to a decimal, but if the answer were to be at 5 over 2, that would also be fine. All right, number 3, keyword, rate of change. Rate of change is another word for slope, which is rise over run. I'm looking for a slope or a rise over run of 1. The thing is, rise over run represents a fraction, so how do I write 1 as a fraction? Just put it over 1. So which graph here has a rise over run of 1 over 1? So I'll just check these until one of them fits, and if I go check A, well, I find that I get 2 over 2. So that's not my answer. Or actually, what's 2 over 2 simplified? That's 1. Probably is my answer. But to be safe, go and prove the others wrong. So if I were to go check C, this is really weird. This is 2 over 3, but this problem's not even linear. It wouldn't even give me a straight line. There's no constant. So for sure, it's not going to be a C. If I go check B, I get a 1 over 2. Not what I'm looking for. And then if I go check D, I get a 1 over 3, which is also not what I'm looking for. So C is a little bit tricky. Careful with that. If you were to check the other piece, this one would give you 1 over 1, but it wouldn't have that constant. So that word constant means it has to be linear also. So my best fit is going to be A. Okay, so which verbal description best represents data in the graph? So at this point, you should know how to write an equation. So all these verbal descriptions, which I guess could be a keyword, represents an equation. So here's the equation for A. 25 an hour, that would be y equals 25x. 25 service fee plus 25 an hour, that could be written as 25x plus 25. And then C could be 30 an hour and then a $30 service fee. So that could be y equals 30x plus 30. And then the last one could be a 15 fee plus 50 an hour. That could be y equals 50x plus 15. And then just keep in mind, these can be written in swaps. So like the last one, 50x plus 15, I could have written it as 15 plus 50x. But the point is that the 50 would have to be next to the x, because that's the format. I'm running them like this to show an mx plus b form. All right. Now, as far as the graph, I can tell it's linear, which is good because they're all linear equations. But here's what you're supposed to notice right off the bat. I'm noticing this, that it does not cross the origin. So upon noticing that, whatever your answer is, it should have a non-proportional equation. It should have an mx plus b. That eliminates a for us. Now, whatever it is, if you know how to find the equation on a graph, you need to know how to find m and b. Well, it doesn't matter which one you find first. I just find that for me, it's easier to find the b, the 0, comma b, which is where the line crosses the y-axis, which is, again, over here. So it happens at 0, comma 25. Whatever my answer is, it also has to end in 25. Of the answers I have left, the only one that has a 25 in the right spot is going to be B. So I can already eliminate C and D. But just for the sake of finding the rise over run, my slope, let's go ahead and do that. So to find slope, you need to find perfect points and then always pay attention to the scale. All my points are perfect here, so this makes it kind of easy. Just watch out. It looks like rise 1, run 1, but if you look at the scale, it's actually rise 50. Oh, did that wrong. Not rise 50. One of the mistakes, though. It's rise 25, run 1, which is just 25. So there's further proof that my slope is 25. You put that all together, you get y equals 25x plus 25. Answer B. All right. Number 2, it says the table below shows the areas of 4 equilateral triangles. Normally, I'd say that's a key word, but the actual question, it only asks which triangle had the least area. I'm just looking for the smallest number. Now, right away, some of you think, oh, I need a calculator to do this one, and you don't. It looks like it. It doesn't really matter because they're all saying something times the square root of 3. So let's just pretend we were to ignore all that. That's basically what I'm looking at. So which of those numbers is the least area? Which is the smallest number? And that would be 2.75, which is answer. And I feel like it's always tricky with these. I'm looking for B, but it's actually H. All right, so watch out for that. Now, if you did use your calculator, that would be fine. Here would be the numbers you would get. You'd still end up proving that the least area, the smallest number there, is still going to be 4.8, which is still B, which is still answer H. I just feel like it would have been easier to look at these without. Now, just to be on the safe side, for those of you that are going to use a calculator, here's how you type that in. When you use a square root key, it's going to be, I believe the first one was 3, and then here's square root. It's behind the squared button, but in blue. So you have to make sure you hit the second. And then another issue I commonly find is that blinker. Some people forget that they need to stop it. In this problem, it doesn't matter. But if you arrow out, that's where it stops the square root from continuing. Just watch out for that. So that's how I rounded my answer to 5.2. The next one was, I think, 2.75. And then times the square root of 3. And then I don't have to arrow out. I can. It really doesn't make a difference. The answer is still the same. That's where I rounded my answer to 4.8. And then I can check the rest if I needed to, but it's fine. I can tell the answer is going to be H. All right, last one. This one is pretty tricky. I recommend you read it to yourself a couple times. Here's the approach that I took. When you read the situation about working and making cakes or whatever, you should realize that this is a proportional situation. It doesn't say the word proportional, but you should be able to use what you know about this situation to figure that out. Now, here's the important piece. I know that in an 8-hour workday, there's 480 minutes. Now, that doesn't mean he's working for 480 minutes. The reason I say that is because he takes 2 15-minute coffee breaks. During those coffee breaks, 2 sets of them, which is a total of 30 minutes, he's not working. So if I take away 30, really, this cake decorator only works for 450 minutes. Now, this is an important thing I'm going to need. And then the rest is, well, since it's a proportion, I can set up one of these, a proportion, where you cross multiply and then divide. Now, if I take this, what I know, let's just set up an order. I know cakes and I know minutes. I know that in 6 cakes, it takes him 90 minutes. What I'm trying to figure out is how many cakes X will he make in 450 minutes. Notice, not 480, 450, because that's how much time he actually spent working. As far as solving this, you guys have been doing this for a while. You guys should know the step is simple. Cross multiply and then divide. If I were to do that, I end up with 90x is equal to 2700. And I've cross multiplied and now I divide. And I'm left with, well, what's 2700 over 90? 30. So he would make 30 cakes in a workday. So which number does not represent a whole number? So I'm looking for not a whole number. Be careful with the word not. Every time you look for the word not, you're probably looking for something that's going to mean false. And then so we're talking about numbers here. This is probably going to make a lot more sense if I'm able to make a real number system. So on the basic, the real number system starts with counting. So I'm going to put C for counting, which could also be called natural. And then that lives inside of whole, which lives inside of integers, which lives inside of real. And then completely apart from it, we have an irrational side. And then all of that is what we call our real number system. So I'll go ahead and call that real. Now the idea is pretty simple. I'm trying to find something that is not a whole number. So just to get the basic idea is you can work your way out, but you can't work your way back in. So if I have a number that's a counting number, like the number 1, the number 1 would also be considered a whole because I can work my way out, which would also be considered an integer, which is also a rational, which is also a real. I worked my way out. But let's say I have a rational number like 0.30. Well, that's a rational number, and I can work my way out to call it a real, but I can't work my way back in and call it an integer. So only work your way out. Now, when I look at my answers and I see 8, well, 8 is a counting, which is also a whole. So 8, I could say, is true. However, because of the word not, I'm looking for a false. Now, if I look at 12, it's the same idea. 12 is a counting, which is also a whole, so that would be true. It is a whole number. Negative 10, though, that one lives in integers, and an integer can be called a rational, but I can't work my way back in to call it a whole, so that would actually be false. And D is true. Oh, but that's a fraction, and fractions are rational. Well, if you simplify 15 over 3, that actually just becomes 5. And 5 is a counting, which is a whole, so that's true. Negative 10 here is false. That's the one that can't work its way back in. So 10 is not a whole number, which is what I'm looking for. All right. So which of the following is the least cost per ounce? All right. So it's a pretty simple way to figure these out. I just do want y'all to keep in mind that per ounce is another word for unit rate, which simply means per one. In this case, it means per 1 ounce. Nothing super tricky here, but you do need to be careful with this. Some of the wordings they use can trick some of you. All right, so here's what I want to do. To find the unit rate, what I want to make sure that I'm going to divide by is the per ounce. So notice, the first problem, I have a total of 28 ounces. Like, well, where did you even get that? Well, I have a 4-pack of 7 ounces. So 7 times 4, because that's how many I have in total, would be 28. Now, the price for that is $2.99. All you got to do is divide so you can get the per ounce, but make sure you're dividing by ounces. Okay, so whatever it says per this, per that, per ticket, per person, per, I don't know what else it can be, per day or something like that. There can be a bunch of pers. Every time it says that, that per whatever goes on the bottom. So what's 2.99 divided by 28? I get 0.11. So 0.11 cents. Now, I don't know if that's the answer until I compare it to the rest. So if I go check the rest, here's G, a 3-pack of 8-ounce cartons. So I would go ahead and do 24 ounces total. And then on top would be 2.75. When I divide, that leaves me with 0.11 cents also, which is probably going to present an issue. I probably should have rounded a little bit further. But I'll come back to it if I need to. H is 2 12-ounce, so that's 24. And then $1.24 each. So notice where I got 2.48. It says 1.24 each. Since I bought 2, I need to double that. So I get 2.48. It's a little bit tricky. Not too bad, though. And that's worth 10 cents each. So I guess I don't have to go check F and G because I know they're not going to work. I know so far the least is H, but I haven't checked the last one. So let's check the last one. So it's going to be 2.19 over 20 ounces. Remember, ounces goes on the bottom. And this leaves me with 11 cents also. Okay, so probably should have gone to go check on the calculator, but it's okay. They all give me 11 cents. I'm not sure if I rounded it or if that was the exact number. What I do know, though, is that the least one is still obvious. That would be H. So a little bit of tricks here with the wording. Notice how many ounces you're actually buying and then the cost. So you do want to just be careful with that. And then this is what they do at the supermarket, by the way. So when you look at the prices, they see there's normally like a little thing in orange or yellow or something like that on the corner of the price. That tells you the per whatever. It could be per can or per ounce or per something. Okay. So which statement is not true? So not true means I'm looking for a false again. Now, if you look at the answer choices, the key word here is really in the answer choice. So what is a function? Here's one definition that I use. It says where every X kid has only one Y mom. Now, that'll mean more things to us later, but for right now, the idea is where every X has only one Y. I add X kid and Y mom because that makes more sense. Every kid has only one mom. And by that, I mean biologically, you can only be born out of one. So we're not doing weird scenarios here, just every kid is born out of one. So if you look at these, A says it's a function if each X is paired with only one Y. That would be true. It is saying the same thing. B is saying if each X is paired with only one Y. It's saying the same thing, except it's on a table, still the same definition. So that's true. A mapping is a function, so that's just another way to put your data. I'll go over that later. If each X value is mapped to only one Y value, saying the same thing. So it must mean D is my answer, but how do I prove that? A graph describes a function if it is a line. So when we get to graphs and functions, you have to know something called the vertical line test. And it's very simple. In order to pass the vertical line test, you can only cross once. Now, the tricky part here is, well, if I draw this line, that'll pass the vertical line test. I draw a line straight up and down, and it'll only cross once, no matter what. The thing is, that's not true for all scenarios. What if I draw a vertical line like this? It's kind of weird, but it's its own vertical line test. It's crossing again and again and again and again. So in order to pass, you can only cross once. And to fail, you cross more than once. So right here, I'm showing you that it's failing at several spots. So D would be false. And that is what I'm looking for. Okay, so key word here, really obvious on this one, non-proportional. Non-proportional linear relationship. Now, if you know this makes it really easy. Non-proportional should have an equation of y equals mx plus b. And if you look quick, only one of these has an mx plus b setup. So if I were to quickly just go and prove the others wrong, b has a y equals kx. C looks a little weird, but if you remember that there's an understood 1 in front of that x, it's really also a y equals kx. And then same thing for D. It's a y equals kx. And B, C, and D would be proportional relationships. And I was looking for non-proportional, which is A. If I wanted to put the 1 there just to show that it's an mx plus b, I could. Not necessary. It's understood to be there. That was pretty easy. All right, on question 2. So the key word here is, it's a big one, so careful with this one. You got the word compounded, okay? I'm also going to come back and make sure you read these questions when you're doing these on your own. Make sure you read them. I'm going to come back to the question in a bit. The question says, how much interest will the account earn after 4 years if it makes no withdrawals or deposits? So we want to make sure that we know how to use that, okay? Now, as far as the formula goes, you'd go straight to your formula chart, and there's a keyword in there that's going to say compound interest. The formula there says A equals, and then it follows by capital P, parentheses 1 plus R, raised to the T. So I need us to figure out these in order to use that formula. So let's go ahead and use that. So what is P? Okay, I'm even going to need an A because something interesting happens here, which is, that'll make more sense in a bit. All right, so let's start with P. P is the principal starting amount. This guy starts off with 1,000. R is the rate. So it's 5%, but you should know that percent cannot be used as a percent. You need to change it to a decimal. And the quickest way I taught was por ciento, por cien. So 5 over 100, which becomes 0.05. And then T is the amount of time in years, which in this case is 4. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and substitute that, okay, in order to find this. Now, the whole purpose of A, what A solves for is the total amount. So when I use this formula, it's going to give me the total amount that's in the account. I want you to keep in mind the question is asking how much interest will be in the account. My problem is going to solve the total amount. All right, so I'll come back to that. So in place of P, I'll use 1,000, parentheses 1 plus R. Don't forget to use the right decimal. This is a common mistake every time we teach this. And then to the power of T, which will actually be to the power of 4. It should be pretty easy to type in. Let's go ahead and get that typed in. So just be careful with this stuff. So we have 1,000, parentheses 1 plus R, 0.05. You could put a 0.05, but it's not necessary. And then to the power of T, which in this case was 4. So notice that the way I typed it in is the exact same way it should look on your calculator. The way I write it is the way you type it. That's a neat thing about these updated calculators and the math print that they have. Okay, so what do we get? Well, go ahead and hit enter, and I end up with this. And since I'm working with money, it makes most sense to round it to the nearest penny. So that'll be 1215.51 cents. Now, a lot of you would be like, "Oh, what the heck happened? I don't see my answer. I must have done something wrong." And no, you didn't. It's just that I told you this equation is solving for the amount of money. That's the total amount. The question was only asking for the interest. So just let's think about this. If I have the total amount of money, I had $1,000 and $1,000 turned to $1,215, that account grew. Now, how much did it grow by? Because whatever it grew by, that's how much it grew in interest. So what do I do to find that number out? Well, if I take away what Graham put in, I'm left with 215.51. The account grew by $215.51. That amount that it grew by is what it grew in interest. So in this case, my answer would be H. So I do want you to be careful with the equation. This equation used A equals the amount. In your formula chart, there's another formula that's called simple interest. That one starts off with I equals, the interest equals. Depending on what I'm trying to answer, you will have to be careful with the actual question. In this case, the emphasis on this one was how much interest will the account earn. So right here, if I had put the answer choice of 1215.51, I'm sure somebody would have made that mistake. I do want you to be careful with that. Okay, in this case, the answer choices were kind of obvious. They made it really simple. I think G would have been the answer if you used the wrong formula. So you do want to watch out for that too. All right, so which equation has a constant of proportionality? Big word, simple word. Constant of proportionality, that simply means the K of the proportional equation. If you know this deals with a proportional equation, you know it has to have a y equals kx set up. That makes this problem even easier because if I look at my answer choices, only one of these even has a y equals kx. So in this case, it's D. And it's what's in place of k, what's in place of the constant, 3. So that's it. Nothing else to this one. I would watch out, just make sure you know that the constant, the k, it's called the constant of proportionality. It could also represent the slope, which is the rate of change, which is the unit rate, which is the rise over run, which is the change in y over change of x. Just some vocabulary words you all should be familiar with. Okay, so Thomas drove 372 miles in 6 hours. At this same rate, how far can he drive in 8 hours? So big key word here. There's a couple different approaches y'all could take. There's not really a right one per se. I know this is one of them that I would take. You should recognize this situation is proportional. Okay, so one of the easy things to figure that out is 372 miles in 6 hours, 0 miles in 0 hours. That 0, 0 is a little bit of hint that it's proportional. And if it's proportional, then I know I can set up one of these, a proportion. Now, when you set them up, there's a bunch of ways to set them up. Just go with some type of consistency. So right now I'm going with hours on top, miles on bottom. So what do I know about hours? I know right now that in 6 hours, he can travel 372 miles. And then if he's going at the same rate, then I should be able to figure out that in 8 hours, notice hours on top, he will travel X amount of miles. How many miles? Well, all you got to do is cross multiply and then divide. So again, this is one approach. There's several. If you take this approach, you're left with 6x, and then what's 372 times 8? I get this big number. And now divide. So what's that big number divided by 6? 496. And the answer's there, pretty straightforward. Now, I know a lot of you probably would have taken a different route, and you're not even sure why you do this, but you know you do this. I just need you to keep in mind that when you divide that, what you are finding is the unit rate. When you divide by 6, you're dividing by hours. You're changing this to a unit rate in miles per hour. And if you're going 62 miles per hour, it's not the answer, but all you got to do is, well, that many miles per hour times 8 hours, and you end up with same thing. There's no right or wrong answer. They're both good. I think the proportional might have been more proper, but this method works good. Makes more sense too. All right. So next, big keyword here. So if you don't know what this means, you're probably going to have a hard time. But supplementary. I don't know, something like that. It simply just means when you have two angles, so angle 1 plus angle 2, and they add up to equal 180. Not to be confused with the word complementary, which means two angles that add up to 90. So, based on this, here's what you know. You have two angles, one's called X, one's called Y. I want you to tell me the measure of the angle Y. Now, this is all abstract. This is algebraic thinking mixed with some geometry. Here's the idea. Angle X plus angle Y, they add up to 180. I don't see that there as an answer, though. But what I do see is that H is using 90, so they're using the wrong rule. And all the answers are in terms of y, because you need to solve for y. Now, hopefully you can tell what you would do if you have both that add up to 180 and you want to figure out y, then you just simply take away the x and you're left with y. It's g. But if you want to be proper, you could just solve for y. So what's the inverse of x? You do the additive inverse plus negative x. And what you do to one side, you do to the other. You're left with y, and on the other side, since they're not like terms, you're just left with 180 plus negative x, which is 180 minus x. It's still g. All right, and the last one. So a lot of keywords here, a lot going on, but here's the basics of what you should have gotten when you read this. The word dilated and scale factor. So the word dilated simply just means to get bigger or smaller. The word scale factor, that means a lot. It's extremely important. For right now, I'm just going to make note that the scale factor is 2. Now, when I go and properly teach you scale factor, you're going to learn that the scale factor is used as a multiplier. The scale factor is calculated by doing new over old. And then depending on whether it's bigger than 1 or greater than 1, it'll mean bigger or smaller. For right now, common sense will tell you that if you use it as a multiplier and you do something times 2, it'll make things bigger. Okay, but as far as for this example goes, here's what we're going to do. Here's an algebraic representation of this dilation. I want you to notice that I'm saying 2x comma 2y. I'm using 2 as a multiplier. Now, all I got to do is I'm going to use an original point. So I chose point F, and I'm going to apply the rule to it. I'm going to multiply it to the scale factor. Now, when I do that, 2 times 0 is 0, and then 2 times negative 4 is negative 8. This is my new point. This is called F prime. That little mark I put on top is prime. Now, the question said which could be a coordinate of dilated. It doesn't guarantee that that was going to be it. It could be. That one doesn't come out, so I have to go and keep on checking. So I do the same idea. I get my next point, G, and I'm going to multiply it times the scale factor. This would leave me with, hopefully you're good with integer rules, negative 6 comma 8. That would be G prime. That one also doesn't come out, so I have to keep on checking. So I go check H, and you multiply it times the scale factor. So that leaves me with 8 comma 14, and in this case, it does come out, H prime. So that's the one that does come out. It's probably my answer. It is my answer. To be proper, though, you always want to make sure you check the final one. If I were to check D, you'd get 9 comma 0, and you would multiply that times the scale factor. You'd get 18 comma 0, which is still not there. Close, but not there. All right, so keywords here. We're going to go with what is y when x is 4.5. I'm going to say that a few times. What is y when x is 4.5? So what's the value of y when x is 4.5? Hopefully, if you say it enough times, you understand that I'm asking what is y equal to when x, notice what I'm doing in place of x, when x is 4.5. All I got to do with this, once you got that set up, is sub it in. So what is 3.5 times 4.5 minus 4? And the calculator will take care of that for you. You should end up with 11.75, which comes out. Okay. All right. A lot more going on the next one here. So which set of real numbers is ordered from greatest to least? Now, this word right here is obviously the keyword. And then I'm hoping you have learned that what is greatest to least. So I've shown something like this, and I had you write that on your formula chart. That means sort, what's greatest to least mean? Sort D, descending. So there's a simple way to do this on the calculator. However, since all the answer choices are different, it would actually take a very long time. So rather what I'm going to do is do it the old-fashioned way, number line. Number line works great. It automatically puts things in order for you from least to greatest. So if you know how to use a number line, that's probably going to be the best route. So right now, what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go check for the obvious. And here's what I mean. If you look at F, I have a negative come before a positive. I don't have to use a number line to know that the greatest number will never be a negative before a positive. So F doesn't work. And if I keep on checking for those obviouses, G seems possible. H, notice what happens again. I have a negative come before a positive. I don't have to know a number line to know that's off. So it's between G and J. What would help is if you go and convert these numbers to decimals. So real quick, I want to do 17 and 1/3. I have a lot of people who have issues with this. It becomes 17.3 repeating, but real quick, here's what you're looking at. All right, so this is some work that I'm doing today in class. All right, so let's reset, and so we're starting from a fresh calculator. So 17 and 1/3. Here's the way that I would do it. You guys should know 1/3 becomes this. And then I would simply just add 17 to that, or just put the 17 in the front. You really should have 1/3 memorized, but 17 and 1/3 is just 17.3 repeating. So I put a little bar on top. And you can do the same thing with the rest. So 15.5, negative 2.5, and then negative square root of 21. Let me go ahead and type that in. So negative square root of 21. Negative square root of 21. Be careful not to use a minus where you should be using a negative. And then notice how using the arrow keys tell you when to stop the square root symbol. It doesn't make a big difference now, but it will in later problems. So approximately negative 4.5. All right, so I'm going to use that number as well. Now, I go put these on a number line and just tell me where they live. 17.3 would be over here on the positive side somewhere. 15.5 would be a little bit closer to the 0. Negative 2.5 would be on the negative side. And then negative 4.5 would be on the negative side, but even further to the left. So these numbers actually look in order from greatest to least. Remember, you would read them from the greatest side to the least side. So it's probably G. But since we're practicing for STAR and we're trying to review stuff, a good test taker goes and proves the other one's wrong. So I keep on going, and let's go check J. So I do the same thing. I'm going to get my decimal values, and here's what I want to go find. And I'm going to put them on a number line. So let's go do that. So here is 5.9 on the right side, on the positive side, and then here's 7.5. Notice that 7.5 is further out. So the greater one should really be 7.5, but it's not in the front. So I already know J is wrong. My answer is for sure G. All right. On this next one here. All right, so we have some equations. I hope these are easy. And I hope we know how to solve them. There's several ways to solve them, but here's how I want to practice. It says the equation is modeled below which statement is true. You write what you see. I see 3x's, I write 3x. I see 4 negatives, that's going to be written as minus 4. If you were to say plus negative 4, that would also be fine. But you need to show me in some form that that's minus 4 or plus negative 4. Equals, notice that the x is shaded. That could also represent negative, but it even has a negative sign. So negative x and then 4 positive, so plus 4. Now, if I go check my answer choices, I already know one of these right here is off. It's missing the negative, and then there's issues with the minus 2. The rest are right. The rest have the correct setup anyways. Which one has the correct answer? There's 3 ways to solve it from here. I would expect my students to know how to do this by hand, hopefully by hand if you want to be ready for high school. You could also go with sub, since you do have answer choices you can sub. And then the third option, probably you all's first option, is solver. But remember, that should be a backup, a way to check the answer, not the only way. So I'm going to do mine by hand. I want to find out which one of those answers is the correct answer. So here's how I teach this. So first off, if there's ever a subtraction, I do keep, change. And then there's a 1 understood to be in front of that x. And my goal is to get x by itself, so I start with getting x on the same side. I like my x's on the left, so I'm going to move my x's to the left. So what's the inverse of negative 1x plus 1x? What I do to one side, I do to the other. I simplify this step. It leaves me with 4x plus negative 4 is equal to, I'm left with 4. All right, now keep on going. Get x by itself. Ask yourself which is further from the x, and that would be the negative 4. So what's the inverse of negative 4? plus 4. And what I do to one side, I do to the other. This will leave me with 4x is equal to 8. And finally, what's the inverse of multiplying by 4? Dividing by 4. And what I do to one side, I do to the other. X is equal to, what's 8 over 4? 2. So my correct answer should be C. Now, if I did go use sub, it would be a very simple process, okay, or solver. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys solver just in case that's something you guys had forgotten. It's a very useful tool. Again, it doesn't really prepare you for high school, but it does help. So you would go and type in your equation. So E1 is the first side. And notice how I got here. In case you guys forgot, you go to math, you scroll up so that you're at the bottom, and then you hit enter on solver. So E1 is the first side of the equation. So my equation was 3x minus 4. And then E2 is for the other side. So you just scroll down or press enter. And that should have been negative x plus 4. And then very important here, a lot of people forget their final step. You have to press solve, but solve is in green. So you have to press alpha solve. So alpha enter. And notice that the x value is 2. So over here I could just prove again that x is equal to 2. Okay, so keywords here. Orientation. Okay, that's a big one. So really quick, before I continue, I need to define orientation. Okay, so an orientation is, this is the way I define it, the position it is facing. So the easiest way I describe this is I simply just tell students your calculator. Everybody uses their calculator with the same orientation. So the way it's facing when you use it should be something like this. Nobody uses it like this, or backwards, or upside down, or whatever. Okay, that's just weird. You use it with this orientation. Okay, now, with that being said, I want to know which do not affect the orientation. So these 4 words, these are your basic transformations. There's subwords for those words. So you should know rotation, but if you don't, then rotation, T is for turn. Reflection, FL is for a flip. And translation is for a slide. And dilation, there's no little special letters in there. It just means to get bigger or smaller. Or I should be using enlargement or reduction. Those are the fancier words when I teach that. Okay, but for right now, which ones do not affect the orientation? All right, so let me go through those words again. Now, let's look at our calculator in standard orientation. Remember, orientation means the position it is facing. So if I rotate, if I turn this, is that the same orientation? And that would be no. So rotation doesn't work. Let's cross that one out. Now, let's go back to standard orientation. Let's say I reflect it, I flip it. So if I flip it, I guess you can say it'd be like this. Is that the same? No. Well, what if I flip it like this? Notice this is also not going to work. So reflection is out. That one does affect the orientation. So we move on to translation. All right, so translation is a slide. So let's slide it this way, that way, down, up, diagonally. Let's just keep on sliding this. And what do you notice no matter what? The orientation is staying the same. I could use it like this. It's still facing me. I can use it like this, like this, like this. So is orientation okay? Yeah, orientation is fine. For a translation. On a translation, the orientation is not affected. So translation is one of them. But what about dilation? So how would I make this bigger or smaller? I'll just use my zoom in and zoom out. So if I enlarge, it's getting bigger, but notice, is the orientation changing? No, it's still facing the same position. What if I make it smaller? It's just getting smaller. It's not changing the orientation. So a dilation does not affect the orientation. So when I go back here, I've eliminated a turn, a flip, and a translation and a dilation are still in. So which ones say that? That'll be C. Okay, for this one here, it's going to be a while before I cover this, but which best describes the relationship represented by the scatter plot. Okay, so really quick on a scatter plot, there's normally a trend line, and then these trend lines, the way you make one is it's always a straight line. Number two is it should go through as many points as possible. And number three is it should have about just as many points above as below. Okay, so that's one way to make a trend line. But either way, you need to tell me what's happening on this pattern. And normally it's common sense. I'm not being super patient here. You guys should when you read these. But what I want you to notice is that as the free shots attempted increases, the free shots made increased as well. So as one increases, the other increases as well. You could say this is a positive linear correlation. But right here, it wants you to put focus on the information. So notice that F, it says as the free shots made increase, the free shots attempted increase. So as one increases, the other increases. Those keywords make it kind of obvious. F is probably my best answer. G, I actually kind of having an issue with this. I'm not entirely sure. Because I know when it says remain constant, it's saying that nothing changes. But at the same time, there's a constant rate of change, which could be a positive linear change. But maybe I'm overthinking it. Okay. Either way, let's look at H and J. As free shots made decrease, the number of free shots attempted increase. So notice that doesn't make sense. As one decreases, the other increases. And that's not happening. As one increases, the other increases. And then J is saying the same thing, but in reverse. So J is also out. Now, the one that makes the most sense based on what I have here is going to be F. Although I'm not sure why G is wrong, but I know F is the answer. So just be careful with that. The more that we can explain why answers are wrong, the better of a test taker you should be. All right, so number 3, coldest to warmest. Interesting way to put this. So when it's cold outside, I would say, oh, it's negative 32 degrees. And you would say, oh, that's freezing. Yeah, because it is freezing. And if it's really hot outside, it's like, oh, it's like 100 degrees outside. Okay, so notice when I say cold, my numbers went low. And when I went warm, as I got hotter, my numbers went higher. So I could say that warmest to coldest is another way to say least to greatest. So that's what I'm looking for here. Now, these are good answer choices. I know a lot of students have trouble with these. You could use sort, by the way. If you know how to use that feature on the calculator, by all means use sort. And sort, in this case, from least to greatest would look something like this. And if you did your notes on your formula chart, you would know that means sort A for ascending. Now, here, since all my answer choices look different, that would take me a really long time. So what I'm just going to do is do it the old-fashioned way, number line. And I didn't realize I'd be writing through that. Let me go ahead and move this. Let's get that there. All right, there we go. Okay, so on a number line, I'd go put these numbers in place. Now, notice that I already got rid of D. If I'm going for the least numbers, I know those should be the negatives up in the front because those would be my smallest numbers. That wouldn't make sense. Now, if I go and check my answers, let's check F. Here's negative 15. It should be on the left side of the number line. And then here's negative 25. It should be further out to the left, further away from the 0. So I already know that these two are going to present a problem because the number line's automatically from least to coldest. So the least number between those two is actually negative 25. That's not going to work. So it's between B and C. So let's go try that. So here's negative 5, somewhere on the left. Here's 0. It's already there. So here's 5, somewhere on the right. And then 8 should be a little bit further past it on the right. These actually look in order from least to greatest. It's probably B, but go and prove why C is wrong. And I would say because here's negative 11 on the left, and then here's negative 14, further to the left, which is not going to work right there. So my answer is B. All right, so keyword here is pretty easy. We've got ourselves a function, and you should know this as where every x kid has only one y mom. Okay, and then from that, you're supposed to get two statements that prove to be very useful. Okay, so the first one is X kids, and think about this, kids, you cannot repeat. You cannot be born out of somebody else. While Y moms can repeat. By that I mean, can somebody else call your mom their mom? And yeah, that happens all the time if you have siblings. So these are called mappings, and then it's very simple to read them. I teach this at the beginning. Hopefully you understand how I'm getting 1, 1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 3. I'm just reading the mapping out. As you get better at this, you shouldn't need to do that, but this is how you do it. Either way, I know my rule. X cannot repeat. And then notice what I find here. The X value of 2 repeats, so I would say this is not a function. And that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to find out which one is a function. So I would go through all of them. I'll write my coordinates, and then you go check. Does your X repeat? So notice on B, the X does repeat. This right here is not a function. I do want you to notice, however, these values over here also repeat, the ones. That doesn't matter. Those are Y values. Those ones I circled in red, those can repeat. So watch out for something like that. If you get the rules mixed up, you're going to get it wrong. B is not a function, so just watch out. Here's C, and as I'm looking at that, do any of those X's repeat? No. So I got myself a function. Okay. And then I go on to D, so it's probably C, but what's the problem with D? And well, there it is. The X value of 2 repeats, so I know it is not a function. My answer is C. Okay, so we got a not true. Basic logic says not true means false. And then it says about integers. So this helps a lot if I know this. Hopefully you know what this is. That's CWIR. I'm talking about counting numbers, which live inside of whole numbers, which live inside of integers, which live inside of rational numbers. And then if I go past this, I got integers on the outside, and all of this are real numbers. All right, but if you know how to use this, this will make this question very easy. Now notice, I just wrote this out of my head. You really should study this when you're doing these type of problems. You should know how that number system works. Okay, so the idea here is you can work your way out, but you can't work your way back in. So F, true or false, all integers are rational. And if you look at your graph, all integers are rational. That's working your way out. That's fine. You can do that. All integers are rational. That is true. So if I look at G, it says if 2 integers are added, the sum is also an integer. Okay, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. As far as I can think of, I can't think of anything that wouldn't work. So that would be true. If 2 integers are added, the answer is an integer. Besides, if you think about it, there's no way you would ever get a decimal out of that or an irrational number out of that, so it can't be rational or irrational. The only thing it can give you is another integer, which could be a whole or a counting. H, if 2 integers are subtracted, the difference is also an integer. That would also be true. When I'm adding or subtracting, I can get negatives, but negatives are integers, so that's fine. And J says if 2 integers are divided, the quotient is also an integer. And that's where I get false. Because let's say I do 4 over 5. Those are 2 integers that are dividing. Now the quotient, the answer, is not an integer. In fact, that quotient is equal to 0.8. And 0.8 is irrational. So I'm working my way out, which I can't do that. It has to stay an integer. Now if I were to do 5 over 5, that's 1. That is an integer. Well, it's a counting, which is a whole, which is an integer. But so long as there's one example that doesn't work, then it would be false for all examples. All right, last one. So based on the information in the graph, what is the unit rate? And then miles per minute. So you should recognize unit rate as another word for rise over run. Just be careful when you do rise over run that you check the scale. And make sure when you find yourself your perfect points, and by perfect points, the 2 that I marked there, those are 2 that I saw. There may be more. It doesn't matter. If I skip one, that's fine, just so long as I simplify my answer at the end. When I do rise over run, the perfect points have to be on the line and the grid. So that grid line I have in the back, pick points that are on both of those, on the line and the grid. So according to what I got here, my rise, careful, it looks like I'm rising 2, but the scale says I'm actually rising 1. And my run looks like 4, and it actually is 4 because the scale is going by ones. So I could count 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So 1 over 4, which is, well, that's it. However, if you look at your answer choices, I don't see it. So another way to show 1 over 4 is as a decimal. So what's 1 divided by 4? You should know that to be 0.25, which is the same as C. Okay, so there's a lot going on here, but let's go ahead and find the key word, and that's going to be rate. What is the rate in miles per hour? And I think that's the part that can make this problem kind of difficult. So what I want to point out is the unit rate, that's where I get the word rate from, is another word for rise over run, which this is the setup I'm going to go for. Because if you notice your answer choices are in miles per hour. So this just makes sense to me to set up everything I do in a miles over hour format. Now, what you should recognize is that when somebody is walking, they're walking this distance, the way this is set up, this is a proportional example. So since it's a proportion, I can set up one of these. Now notice what I know. I know that he's going 5.5 miles in 2 hours. Now, where did I get 2? Well, that you should be able to figure out by knowing he left at 9 and arrived at his friend's at 11. So between 9 and 11, that's 2 hours. Now, that is equal to how much? So this is one way to figure it out. I can set up a proportion and simply just do, well, if 5.5 miles is done in 2 hours, that is X how much in 1 hour. Now this is probably a fancier way to do it than I have to, but it works. So if you just cross multiply and divide, you end up with X is equal to 2.75, which is B. Now if you wanted to from the beginning, you could have just done 5.5 divided by 2, but you have to know that dividing that gives me the unit rate, the per one, which essentially is what I did anyways. But either way, so long as you understand how to get the rate as a unit rate, as a per one, then no problem. So just notice that the answer choices, that per hour, that is per 1 hour. All right, on 2, it says, which line describes a line with a y-intercept of 6? So some big definitions here. You have to know that word comes from this equation. That's my slope-intercept form. And that the M stands for slope, and the B stands for y-intercept, which is actually what I'm looking for. So all I need is which equation has a 6 in place of where the B is. And it's kind of easy once you look at it, but if we just go and break them down, F is wrong because it's not even the right type of equation, and it's saying that 6 is the slope, and that's not what I need. J is wrong because it's dividing by 6, which is actually going to mean a bunch of other things, and I'll explain that in a bit. But right now, G, notice what I did on G, notice that change. There's an understood 1 in front of it. I'm just pointing that out. It doesn't actually affect it, but it does have mx plus b. Some students think that, oh, there's no m, and there is, it's just you don't have to write the 1. But notice it's an mx plus b, and guess what's in place of b? The y-intercept. So if I write it side by side, notice the 6 is in place of b. So my answer is probably G. It is G. If I look at H, you can clearly tell it doesn't have the right y-intercept. And then here's what I meant by J. If you actually were to go and rewrite J, it would be like this. And you'll get better at this as you go into Algebra 1. So notice the y-intercept is 1 over 6, which is not the same as 6. So that's why J was off. All right. Number 3. So notice at the top there was a typo. I had to fix that. So that's what I went ahead and did there. And I want you to notice that little squiggle. that means that triangle ABC is similar to triangle DEB. That's important because similar shapes not only mean same shape, different size, it means that they are proportional, which is exactly what I need for this situation. I can set up a proportion, but you have to know that. You have to know that similar shapes are proportional. So let's solve for x and y. So here's the idea behind a proportion. There's a ton of ways to set it up. So long as you follow a pattern and you stick with it, it should work. Now, in this case, I'm noticing that there's a big triangle and that there's a small triangle. So I'm just going to use a big one and then I'm going to use a small one. That's how I'm going to refer to them. So let's say I want to solve for x. X is from the big triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and use x on top because that's from the big. Now, what am I going to put on the bottom from the small? You just have to make sure you choose a side that is corresponding to x. That means same spot, different location. So x is on the same spot as 8, but 8 is from the smaller one. That's one way. Now, this proportion, I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. Just remember, the other side has to be something that is also big over small. So if you look at what I have left, it doesn't make any sense to use 12 and y because then I couldn't solve for either one. So I have to use 15 and 10. Now, where does 15 belong? Well, 15 is from the big, so that goes on top. And the corresponding side, 10, goes on bottom because that's from the small. And all you got to do is cross multiply and then divide. So if I go ahead and do that, I have to do 8 times 15, which I'll go ahead and show over here. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. And then here we go. So I'll just do 8 times 15 and then divided by 10. So cross multiply and then divide. So the answer I'm looking for here is 12. X is 12. Now, normally I would have to continue to go solve for y, but if you notice your answers, only one of them has x as 12. Might want to be careful with B though. I can see somebody making a mistake there, but that's not going to do it on this case. All right, so keywords here. I'm going to go with dilated and scale factor. So this is a bunch of stuff that's happening here. This is a big concept, but for right now, for what I've taught you, I'll come back to those in a bit. I also want to notice not true, which is a false. So it's basic logic. Not true means I want it false. All right, so real quick. Dilated means to get bigger or smaller, and the scale factor is 2. And you'll learn later on that the scale factor is used as a multiplier. Okay, and then there's more stuff about it, like if it's greater than 1, it means it's an enlargement. And if it's less than 1, then it means it's a reduction. Okay, now let's see what we can figure out just from what we know about what I've told you. So A says the image will have the same orientation. And that is actually true. So if you remember, I told you before, when we're looking at a shape, if I make it bigger, should I just bring it closer to the camera, or smaller, I'm not changing the position it is facing. So notice the orientation stays the same. Okay, so that's actually true. Now, B says the image is congruent to the original. Well, if you know what congruent means, then you know that this can't work, because if I dilate something, it gets bigger or smaller. But if I'm saying it stays congruent, then I'm saying it stays the same size, same shape. It does stay the same shape, but the dilation won't make it the same size. So that is false. And then it says the image is the same shape as the original. And yeah, that would be true. A dilation doesn't change the shape, it just changes the size. That would be kind of weird if you made something bigger and a triangle became a circle, or it became a rectangle. So that wouldn't work. And then in order to prove D, I'd have to go and work it out, which I'm not going to do, but I have enough for me to say that it is B. Okay. All right, so on this one, let me go to the final part. It says, how much money will she save if she borrows the money from the bank and pays off her credit card? So here's what we have going on. When you went to go read this, she has one option, which makes her pay $186 for 36 months. And then the other option pays $159 for 36 months. So clearly, if you're going to pay for the same amount of time, you might as well go with whichever pays less, or whichever one you have to pay less. So how much will she save? Well, here's the first option, and here's the second. If she goes with the credit card, she'll have to pay $186 36 times, once each month, which gives me $66.96. If she goes to the bank, she only has to send $159 36 times, which, notice, she pays less. Either way, it's not a good deal. Just in general, don't do debt and don't borrow money. I wouldn't want to pay a credit card or a bank. But for the sake of this problem, it's asking how much will she save. So by that I mean how much less does she pay. So I would need to subtract, and once you subtract, you end up with 972. My answer is H. Careful with F. Hopefully you're not dyslexic and mix up the numbers. Dyslexic, and you're not pronouncing stuff wrong either, like I am. Okay, and last one. So when I see something like this, there's just certain things I want to point out. When you look at the answer choices and then you look at that picture, that table, that should hopefully drop a few hints for you. Now, you should always definitely read these. I'm just going to go with this. When I see that, the first thing I think of is sub. That's one of the easier options. There is also the method of linear regression, which I strongly recommend as a backup. And then you also got this one. It's not a favorite, but it does work. A y equals table. Now, what I would simply just do is just sub. So you're going to get your g values, or you can say your x values, and plug it in. So if I plug it in, what's 2 times 4? And I get 8, which is what's supposed to happen. If I keep on doing that, check the next one. What is 12 in there? So what's 2 times 12? And I get 24. And if I keep on following that pattern, notice what's 2 times 44? 88. And I do the last one. What's 2 times 60? 120. Well, I just found out that that works for all of them. So which is the equation that matches that? Which equation shows the same relationship? And that answer would be B. Now, linear regression, great method. It helps you for a lot of more complicated problems. But in this case, let me go ahead and show you anyways, just to be safe. So the way you do linear regression is you go to Stat, Edit, and you're going to go ahead and type in under list 1 your x values. So it's going to be 4, 12, 44, 60. Whoops. 60. Now, under list 2, you do the y values. So 8, 24, 88, and the 120. Now, you don't have to type in all the numbers. Oh, I'm actually messed up a number here. 12. Not bad. You only need 2, but you could do it with all. It's just sometimes if you want to save time, you would put only 2 sets of data, but I'll use all of them. Now from here, carefully, once you have your data in there, you go to Stat, Calculate, number 4. Notice a linear regression. That AX plus B is what we consider the MX plus B. And you'll simply just scroll down to calculate, and the answer I'm looking for, in this form, you would say y equals 2x. However, this problem did use different letters, but the idea is still there. The y equals 2x is the b equals 2g. Okay, so linear regression is a great method. Don't overuse it, but it is there as a good backup option. So since we're just practicing for review and for STAR, this is the methods, but be ready for the other stuff I've shown you by hand if you want to make it to high school. All right, so let's find the key words here. So cylindrical, diameter is important, height's important, but then here's the main part. How much concrete was used? So if you have a cylinder, a big column. Think of like the White House columns, something like that. When they pour concrete, concrete is like a sludge. And when you pour concrete, the sludge, the concrete mix will fill. And this is supposed to be helping you think of a way to, the keywords for fill, hold, contain. These are all keywords for volume. So this is a volume question. Although it doesn't actually mention the word volume, the way concrete works makes it a volume problem. And the volume of a cylinder is area of the base times the height. And hopefully you know area of the base is the area of a circle. So the formula gets adjusted like this. Pi r squared times the height. And all I need is r and h. So what's my r? What's my h? My radius is 2, half the diameter, and my height is 20. So I plug in my numbers, and what does that give you? So let's go and do a quick check on that. So pi 2 squared times 20. So pi 2 squared, and then I can put the 20 in parentheses. Or I can just say times 20, that's fine too. But I get about 251. I'm just going to go ahead and round. So I get about 251. Now, here's where a lot of people might go wrong. A lot of you would go for A, but you need to remember the wording. The question asked me about how much concrete for 3 columns. The answer I have right now, 251, is for 1 column. I need to triple that number to get 753, and that's how I end up with my right answer of B. And then don't forget to do the units cubed. That's another hint that this was volume. In fact, from the beginning of the problem, if you look at just the answer choices themselves, feet cubed, that would have been a big hint that this was a volume question, even though it didn't mention the word volume. So if you weren't sure how concrete works, the answer choices would have given you the hint too. Alright, so keyword here is non-proportional. So if you look at F, that one definitely looks like a y equals kx, which you all should know is proportional. G is a little bit weird, but if you remember, there is a 1 there. It has an mx, it has a b, it just doesn't have it in the order you're used to, but it is still an mx plus b, which is non-proportional. Probably my answer. Go check the rest anyways. H is definitely a y equals kx, and so is j. In fact, if you wanted to rewrite j, you can say y equals 2 over 5 x. You don't have to actually leave it like that. And this gives it more of that y equals kx feel, which would be proportional. And so which is the one that stands out? Which is my non-proportional example? G. Okay. Alright, so which set of real numbers is ordered from least to greatest? So that's a big keyword. If you wanted to, it would take a lot longer. You could do sort, and then what is least to greatest? Sort A, sort ascending. Otherwise, you could just go and try to find your issues. I would recommend a number line or the calculator, but in this case, it's probably easier just to use a number line. Let's see, if I go look at this from least to greatest, let's see, I'm noticing this here is out of order on B, so it's not going to be B. And then, what else am I noticing? I know right here, you should know 3/4 as 0.75. That is not greater than 85%, because percents are supposed to be por ciento over 100, and that would be worth 0.85. So that's not in order either, from least to greatest. And from the two I have left, I'd have to just go and check them, but the answer ends up being D. And if I go check A really quick, this would be negative 0.50, and this one would be negative 0.60. That right there would also not be from least to greatest. If you use a number line, negative 60 is actually less than negative 0.50. Alright, so I'm looking for a slope of 3. And when I say the word slope, you should think rise over run. So I'm looking for a slope of 3, but put it in rise over run form, and I'm looking for 3 over 1. So I'm going to go and find me the slopes of each of these answer choices. And just keep in mind that when you're doing this, you need to select points, perfect points. So you notice the two I already have there. The reason I know they're perfect is because they're on the line and the grid. That's the two main details you need to have when you pick a perfect point. Otherwise, it doesn't count. So make sure every time you find points to calculate your slope, or just any points, it needs to be points that are on the line and the grid. So I chose 3,2 and 6,4. And if I go do rise over run here, make sure you check the scale, but my scales are going by ones here, so that's pretty easy. My rise is 2, my run is 3. And I'm looking for a slope of 3 over 1. So it's not the same. So I go and check the next one. So here are my 2 points. And I can pick as many as I want, but I only need 2. My rise here is 3, run 1, which is actually going to be my answer. But check the others anyways. So I go check on C. And according to this, I'm seeing a rise of 2 over 2, which is just 1. So that's not going to work either. And then D, I don't really have to check D. But I will. But notice that before I even do anything on it, on D, you should have noticed it was downhill. It had a negative slope. And if I know my answer was a positive number, it should be going uphill. So for sure I could have eliminated D. But either way, it's good to check all my answers. I know now for sure the answer is B. 3 over 1, which is the same as 3. All right, on the next one. So some girl drove, and it's asking for her unit rate. It's asking for her slope. And then if you understand how it works when you drive, you should also understand that this is a proportional situation. And I want to find out her per 1, her unit rate, her rate of change, but in per 1. So I do got to make an adjustment. And one of the simple ways that I'm going to solve this is, there's many. I'm just going to do a proportion. I'm going to set up a fraction equal to another fraction. Now, notice that I started it off with miles over hours. The reason I did that is you look at the answer choices. All the answer choices are in miles per hour. Miles over hours. So it's going to help me set up my proportion in the right order. So when I go and set it up, I know I have 195 miles in 3 hours. Notice the order that I'm going in. Now, what I want to find out is how far or how fast is she going in 1 hour. So notice I know the 1 hour. That will also go at the bottom where the hours are. Up top, that's my x value. That's what I'm solving for. Now I got to do is cross multiply and then divide. So what's 195 divided by 3? 65 miles per hour. Okay, and then the last one. It says, what is the constant of proportionality? It's a big fancy word for slope. Really, it's the k, the constant. It's looking for y equals kx, but a k is actually also the slope. So I am looking for the slope, which will make the method I use here a rise over run. Do notice, though, that it is a proportional relationship. It has that origin in there, that 0, 0. All right, so when you find slope, all you got to do is find those perfect points again. Remember, they have to be on the line and the grid. And you have a bunch of perfect points here, so easy to find. But I do need you to be careful with the scale. So when you look at the scale, you'll see here the y-axis is going by ones. But careful, because your x-axis is going by twos. So you always want to make sure when you count rise over run, you pay attention to your scales. Because if you count wrong, the chances are you'll have the wrong answer in there. It's typically what they do. But right here, although it looks like 1 over 1, which is 1, which is there, it's not. You got to look at this as a rise of 1, but the run is actually 2. The scale on the x is going by 2. So when you count rise, it's fine to count up by 1. But when you count run side to side, you got to count by 2s. So it's 1 over 2, which is really 0.5. So careful. I could see some of you falling for something like this just because it's so simple. So something easy to just overlook. Alright, so I'm looking for a rational but not an integer. So it can only be a rational. So it seems pretty straightforward. As long as you know what those words mean. Integers are positives and negatives. That does not include decimals or fractions though. Rationals would be fractions, decimals, percents, positives, negatives. It would include almost every numbers that we're comfortable with that we use. Okay, now, so just what are they? 4 would be here's one approach to take. If you go real basic, 4 is a counting number, which is a whole number, which is an integer. And then right there is enough for me to say that it's not A. B, -8, is an integer. Then it's a rational. Then I could say it's a real. I can keep on going. But either way, it doesn't matter because it's an integer. And that's not what I'm looking for. Now, 13/2, otherwise known as, what's half of 13? That would be what, 6.5? That right there is a decimal. So that would make this a rational and a real, which is exactly what I'm looking for. So probably going to be C. If I go check D real quick, that would be a counting, which is an whole, which is an integer, and then right there is enough for me to know that it's not going to be D, and my answer is C. Okay. All right, and then next one says, which rules will contain the origin when graphed? Okay, so those rules we're looking at are just basic equations, and there's two types that I'm noticing. So the origin that I'm looking for is that 0, 0. That means it'll cross the origin. Now, what you could do is you could go graph all these in your calculator, and I'll probably go do that in a bit. But right now what I want you to notice is that there's only two types of equations here. There's a y equals kx, known as proportional, and then there's a y equals mx plus b, known as non-proportional. So, if we know our vocabulary, we should already know that proportional will cross the origin, and non-proportional does not cross the origin. We refer to it as the 0, b, the y-intercept. Now, y equals kx is proportional, y equals mx plus b is non-proportional. So I want the ones that have the origin, therefore I want the ones with y equals kx. And which answer choices have that? A and C. So this is actually probably a popular question. There's a lot of different structures to this. I could have asked which one will not cross the origin. I could have talked about their y-intercepts. I could have talked about the positive slopes, negative slopes. It's a good thing if you guys know how to break down this information. All right. So right here, here's an obvious keyword. I wouldn't recommend you using actually sort. Actually, hold on. There's something I wanted to do here. I want to go graph these before I forget. So let's go to our calculator. Let's graph all these. So you go to your y equals, and you can put up to 10 equations at once. I'll just put the 4 that I have. So it's 4x. The next one is y equals, I believe it was x plus 4. Okay. And then it was 2x. Well, that's going to be annoying on the video. But I am at school, so that happens. And then x plus 2. Alright, so notice that the colors, each equation has a color. So right now I was saying the answers were blue, the 4x, and the black, 2x. Now when you look at the graph, I want you to notice what the blue lines and the black line does. So here's my blue, there's my black. Notice that my lines, the blue and the black, are the only two that cross the origin. That's because they are proportional. So this could have been another way to check your answer as far as which ones will cross the origin. I can't get that bigger. No, that's fine. Okay, so the graphing calculator is going to help you guys a lot. Just remember it's on the y equals. This is where you input your equations, and then you simply press graph. Now, if there's ever an error or something, I recommend you reset your calculator before you use it. Reset it just to be safe. Otherwise, it's pretty easy to use. Okay, so there's another way to prove that those are the two that cross the origin. All right, so next one. I'm going to do a least to greatest. So it could involve a sort A, but notice the way they word this. It's he ordered 4 of them as follows, and what it wants is which of the following could be the missing integer. The one I'm missing is the smallest integer. So I want to pick a number that's smaller than all of these. Now, you should know a number line is automatically from least to greatest. So I want a number that's going to live somewhere over here. So which number goes further past -5, further away from the 0? It can't be a positive number, so I can get rid of D already. And then for the ones I have left, this is why I use a number line. It should be -8. You see, -2 would live somewhere right here. And then -4 would live somewhere over here. And the one that's further out would actually end up being -8. That would be my true least number, or the smallest integer that I'd be looking for. Alright, so Jamie predicted that when x equals 11, then y equals 13. Which graph was Jamie using to make this prediction? So, when x is 11, y is 13. Notice, when x is 11, y is 13. I don't know, I feel like if you say it enough times, you'll realize it's an x comma y coordinate. I want to know which graph has an x comma y, a coordinate of 11 comma 13. Now, if I go and mark 11 comma 13 on both, it becomes pretty obvious which one does that. Now, remember when you're looking at a scatter plot and you make a trend line, the trend line, notice the first one I did, it has to go through as many points as possible with about as many points above as below. And notice that my trend line looks like it could possibly pass through 11 comma 13. Now, if I go to my other graph, this trend line, it doesn't seem like it would go through 11 comma 13. So if you know how to make a trend line, you follow simple rules. It's straight line, goes through as many points as possible, and it'll have about as many points above as below. That's what I'll use to make this easy. My answer is only graph C. If the questions were to get more complex, like if it was to ask me for a point way outside of the range that I can see, like instead of 11 comma 13, let's say it asked me for, I don't know, like 35 comma whatever. Well, you notice that the x value of 35 doesn't fit within here. That question would become more complex, and I would have to start getting the equation of my trend line to solve what is the value of y when x is whatever. But for right now, this is pretty basic, but we do need to know how to use a trend line. So it's those 3 rules I had just mentioned. Straight line goes through as many points as possible, and third one, about as many points above as below. Alright, so which of the following describes an enlargement? Alright, so if you look at these answer choices, you should know that you're working with a dilation. And when you work with dilations, that always has something to do with the SF. And when I say SF, I mean the scale factor. And then here's what you need to know to be able to answer this one. It's really easy. It's kind of common sense. The scale factor is used as a multiplier. So I want you to think about when you multiply things. When your scale factor is greater than 1, when you multiply times a number greater than 1, that'll make things bigger. And then the opposite is true. If I do the scale factor times a number less than 1, then that'll make things smaller. In this case, I want something that's going to make an enlargement. I want something that's going to be bigger. So I need a scale factor greater than 1. So which is the only option here greater than 1? That's G. All right. So somebody bought 5 pounds for $1.75. I want the same price per pound. Notice that word price per pound. That is a per one. That is a unit rate. Okay? So I want something with the same unit rate. Now, there's an easy way to do this. There's several ways. I'm going to go with the easiest route. Right now, I want to find out what was the price per pound, per 1 pound. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and just get the unit rate. I'm going to do it by dividing. But notice what I'm going to divide. It's going to be money over pounds. The way it words it, price per pound, you have to set it up where it's money over pounds. So when you go and divide, make sure you're always dividing money divided by pounds. So I'll do the first one. The money, the cost was $1.75. The pounds was 5. So what's $1.75 divided by 5? And I would get approximately 35 cents, right? Now, I want to find out which of those answer choices has the same price per pound. So I'm looking for 35 cents per pound. Just make sure you set it up right. It's price over pounds. So if I go check A, it's 75 cents over 2. And that'll give me 38.38. I think it might give me a little bit off. Let me go check. So what is 0.75 divided by 2? So it's 0.375. But if I were to round it to be to the nearest penny, because technically you can only pay with pennies, it would be about 38 cents. Now if I go check the next one, what is $2.10 divided by 6? So let's go check that. So 2.1, which is the same as 2.10, divided by 6. And I get, notice, 35 cents. This one actually has the same unit rate. But again, a good test taker is going to go check all the other answers. Right? You'll pass if you can go get me the right answer. You'll do exceptionally well if you can get me the right answer and prove to me why the others are wrong. So if you went to go check C and D, here's what you get for C. You'd pay 36 cents per pound. And then on D, you'd end up paying 40 cents per pound. So which one of these has the same unit rate, the same price per pound? That would be B. All right, so let's read. Got a lot of reading. There's several keywords that we want to be careful with, but nothing too crazy. So let's see which one matches. So A says 3 times a number increased by 3. So that's 3x plus 3 is the same as. So we want to be careful with that word. That's my equals. And then let's see the other side. 5 times a number decreased by 7. So 5 times some number, we'll call it x, decrease minus 7. So it comes pretty close, but it's not exact. All right, so let's keep on going. So I just want to keep in mind, the issue that I have here is this parentheses part. It doesn't have that. I don't want y'all to think that this part here does not match this part. Because I can actually say this in whatever order I want to. I can say 3s plus 3, or I can say 3 plus 3s. I can switch the order in which I add. So the issue is with the parentheses. So I keep on going. So 3 times a number increased by 3. So 3x plus 3 is the same as, so equals. Then I want to be careful here. It says 5 times the difference. So notice the previous one said 5 times the number. So that would be 5x. But this one says 5 times the difference. you want to be careful with times the difference. You're going to multiply a subtraction problem. So how do you write 5 times a subtraction problem? Well, that's where the parentheses comes in. Parentheses right there, 5, and then what the parentheses means times. So when it says 5 times the difference is in a parentheses. And B actually does match now. But you want to be careful with the 5 times the difference. Okay, I know that's something that's not practiced heavily in 8th grade, but it is a possibility. So, the last one, just to be safe, it's 3 times the age, so 3x increased by 3, and then equals his age multiplied by 5. So his age times 5, so 5x, then decreased minus by 7. There you go. So they all look kind of close, they look kind of the same, but the one that has it right is going to be B. So I want to be careful with these reading ones. I recommend you read them at least 2 to 3 times before you start trying to write an equation. All right. So which graph would have a trend line of y equals negative 2x plus 8? All right, so there's a lot going on here, a lot that you should know. So here's the first thing I would hope you guys would know. This is an mx plus b equation. It's non-proportional. And non-proportional should not cross the origin. So if I go and do that, I'll make my trend lines. None of them cross the origin, so that didn't really help. Okay, I do want to mention something about the lines that I drew. They weren't just random. When you make a trend line, you have to follow 3 rules. So 1 is it has to be a straight line. 2 is it has to go through as many points as possible. And 3 is there should be about as many points above as there is below the line. Alright, so let's look for more details. I do know that the slope should be a negative 2. Hopefully y'all didn't catch too much of that announcement. Okay, but here it goes. I know the slope is negative 2. So if the slope is negative, I know it should be going downhill, which helps me get rid of one of the answers. So it's always good to use this method. All right. The other thing that's easier for me to check is the B, the y-intercept. I know it should cross at 0, 8. The only problem is, from the remaining answers, they all cross at 0, 8. So it's time to go back and put our focus into the slope. I need a slope of negative 2. So hopefully you made good trend lines. Otherwise, your answers might be a little bit off, but you can still kind of tell. Here's the other point I found on F. Remember, I drew that trend line. That line that I drew doesn't necessarily have a point where I just marked it. I don't know if y'all can tell where I'm marking it. So if your trend line's good, then it should work. But my rise is 2, my run is 1. Negative 2 over 1, which is the same slope. It's probably F, but go and check the others. So on G, here's what I end up with. I end up with something that looks like negative 1 over 3. And then on J, here's the point I chose, something close to negative 1 over 5. So which one has the same slope and the same y-intercept? That would be F. Now, this is the way to do it by hand, which is strongly recommended. There's another way, it has some flaws, but it's still very useful, to do it through the graph. So let's use our calculator. Let me go ahead and reset mine. So second plus 712. And I want to go ahead and head to my y equals, and I want to graph this equation. I want to graph negative 2x plus 8. So negative 2x plus 8. And make sure you use the negative key for negative and not the minus key. Some people still do that. All right, now here's the issue for when you graph. I'm looking for which graph doesn't look kind of the same. And if you take a glance at this one and the one I'm looking at, it's pretty obvious. F is the closest one. The issue is I want y'all to be careful with your how do I do this? Oh, here you go. I want you to be careful with your scale, because a lot of times your scale won't be the same. And then notice they're not evenly spaced out. So sometimes it's not necessarily going to look the same, even though it is the same graph. So right now, because my numbers are pretty much almost the same as the ones in my problem, I'm not going to have an issue. The normal window for a calculator goes 10 in every direction. And then on your paper, on our assignment, yeah, I can't go back to that one. That's fine. They went almost 10 in every direction also. It's just sometimes if you have a different scale, if you have different things, you're going to have to go change the scale to get an identical looking graph. You can change the scale here by going to the window. That's probably the best bet. If you understand how to use these min, max, and scale keys, they're pretty easy. And then just a heads up, if you change the X-res, say to like 3 or 4, when you graph, it actually graphs a lot faster. In case any of you have noticed that you're not patient enough to wait. All right, so what is the volume of the sphere? So volume and sphere being the main key words. And, well, go to your formula chart and what's it say under there for volume of a sphere? So it should say 4/3 pi r cubed. Cubed. 4/3 pi r cubed. And a lot of people make the mistake of saying 4/3 pi r squared, because we use pi r squared a lot, but this particular formula says 4/3 pi r cubed. Be careful with that. All right, so in order for me to use it, all I need is r. However, the way they give you the information, it's not as easy as you would have hoped. So you have to go in, to the formula chart to find out what we know about circumference. And if you go, you have 2 formulas there. One of them says pi d. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this circumference, 18 pi, equal to pi d. Now the reason I do that because, well, if pi is pi, if I take out pi from both sides, I'm left with 18 is equal to d. And if the diameter is 18, then you should know the radius is 9. So this is one of the more complicated versions of you being given the information. Most of the time they give you diameter. Sometimes they could give you the circumference. But either way, I'm able to find out that my radius is 9. So that's what I'm going to substitute. Gave a little bit too much information there. All right. Either way, if you type that in, what is 4/3 pi 9 cubed? So let's go ahead and type in the fraction. And I need to type in 4/3. Whoops. Make sure you scroll down. 4/3 pi. Now, my r will be 9 and then cubed. So I'll use caret key. And the answer it gives me is this. Now, this answer is correct. However, if you look at your answer choices, you don't see it there. Now, the reason is, if you look at your answer choices, these answers are in terms of pi. Now, there's 2 ways to solve it from here. The one I recommend is just work out the same problem in terms of pi. And all that means is you work it out without the pi. So what's 4/3 times 9 to the 3rd? This is my answer. All I got to do is put a pi next to it. So this answer is really the same original answer, but it's in terms of pi. Now, the other thing you could do, see the answers there as answer choice C. The other thing you can do is just finish working out the answer choices. So like if I were to type in 48 pi, notice it doesn't get me to that 3053. Same thing if I were to try B, 144 pi. 144 pi. It still also wouldn't take me close enough to that 3053. But I already checked that 972 pi really does give me the same answer. So right here, you could work out all your answer choices. That is an option. And the only one that would come out to the same is C. I really prefer that you guys know that there's 2 ways to write down all the answers though. I like to say the first one's just fully worked out, and then the second answer is in terms of pi. So just be ready for something like that. Okay, so we want to find a keyword here, and the main keyword I can find is where it says that's important, that's important. All this is important, so this is important information. But what I want to focus on is where it says is the same as. This right here is going to tell me that I'm working with an equation. And then the fact that it tells me to solve for x. So on some of these reading ones, I know we have a lot of issues, but if you find the basic parts in there, it'll give you an idea what you're looking for. Now, I have an equation. I want to solve for x. And notice the information I already gave you. So it contains the same number of nickels as dimes. So every time it says nickels or dimes, I don't know the number of them, so I'm just going to say x. Now, notice how it starts off with 3 times the value of the nickels. And notice what I put on top of that. Well, what's 3 times the value of a nickel? That's 15 cents. So I got that part. And then decrease by 90 cents. Okay, so I got that. So here's the first part. 3 times the value of the nickels. So 15 cents times X number of nickels. Decreased by 90 cents. Notice I'm using the decimals here, since I'm talking with cents, pennies. All right, is the same as equals the value of the dimes. So what's a dime worth? 10 cents. So I could say 0.10 and then however many dimes I have. So I'll say X. Now, there are several ways I can solve this equation, but you need to make sure you have it right. So here are the most popular methods. There's the method by hand. There is substitution, which I strongly recommend. It's an easy, safe method. And then there's one more method that you guys will know as solver. This is a lot of y'all's favorite. I don't recommend that one. Do it by hand or sub. But if you are going to use solver, make sure you know how to do the other ones at least. So I'm going to go ahead and check it with sub. So I'm going to substitute an answer in there, and well, if it comes out true, then I'll know it's my answer. All right, so here's a simple way to check this. All right, so let's start subbing. So here's what I want to go with. I'm just going to go through the answer choices. So it's 0.15. And then I'm not going to put X. I'm going to put one of the answer choices. So let's say I go with answer choice A. Say there's 20 of them. And then minus 0.90. Now, you can only type in one side and then the other side. So here's the first side, 2.1. All right, is this equal to the other side? Is that equal to 0.10 X, which in this case will also be 20 again. So, is this true? Is this top side equal to the other side? And that would be no. So that would mean that the answer could not be 20. So I have to go back and I'll go try another answer choice. So maybe I'll try 8 or 19 or 18. I prefer to go in order. To save some time though, I'm going to go ahead and check D. I'm pretty sure the answer is D. So I'm going to do the same thing. So 0.15. I'm not going to type in X. I'm going to type in the answer minus 0.90. And then I'm going to check what this side gives me. So this side gives you 1.8. Well, is that equal to 0.10x, which is going to be 18 again? And notice that it does. It gives you the same thing. So, according to what I just checked through substitution, when x is 18, it is equal. So what is the value of x? How many nickels or dimes should I have? I should have 18. And when I went to go check this, it gave me $1.80 is equal to $1.80. So my answer must be D. Now, another really popular method I'm going to show you guys is solver. I like this as a last resort, but for some of us that are struggling with this whole algebraic stuff, it's a really good fallback. I just need you to keep in mind, solver is of no use if you can't actually write out your equation. So if from the very beginning you couldn't even write down this, you're probably, solver's not going to help you. In fact, none of these methods are going to help you if you can't write it in the first place. So do make sure you practice with your writing. So here's how you use solver. You're going to go to your TI and you're going to go to math, scroll up, and mine says numeric solver, yours will say solver, and here's what I'm using. Hopefully you have an updated version and it looks like this. So type in the first side of your equation. So 0.15 x minus 0.90, and then on the E2, the second side of your equation, it was 0.10 x. Alright, so I've done that. Go ahead and scroll down or press enter, and you get to this screen. Now notice it says 10 there. That's not my answer. That's just what it left there from the last time I used it. Normally it'll just say 0. So do be careful. Now to get your actual answer, you need to press solve. That's in green behind the enter key. So you have to press alpha, enter, and then just like that, it's giving me the value for x. So pretty easy just to know how to use this. But again, this is no use to you if you can't even write the equation yourself. So just keep in mind that it's better for you to be able to do this by hand or even by sub. But for those of you that struggle, this is a perfectly good method. In fact, I would use it to check my answer after I've done it by hand. All right. So next one right here. I want something that is not linear. And I think this is pretty easy. Looks like I made one of these lines crooked. But not linear. Which one here is not a straight line? And there's one really obvious one, so hopefully y'all don't struggle with something like this. This is really basic keywords. But do make sure you circle that word not, because I'll see a lot of people mess up that word or they'll overlook it. I'm looking for not a straight line. J is not a straight line. Okay. All right. So which of the following sets would belong to the integers? And there's a typo here, so I just need to fix those. But which ones belong to integers? So here's an interesting way to look at a number line. So I live in Edinburgh, which is in Texas, which is in the U.S., which is in North America. And if I wanted to be more precise, the 8th grade TEKS talk about Asia. And when I say Asia, I really mean irrational numbers. And then all of those numbers exist on, well, what's North America and Asia in? That would be the real numbers, which I'll refer to as Earth. So here's how I use this. It works pretty simple. You can work your way out, but you can't work your way back in. So for example, if I am from Edinburgh, I am also from Texas, which also makes me from the US, which makes me from North America, which makes me from Earth. So I can work my way out, but I can't work my way back in. So for example, let's say I'm from the US. Well, does that make me from Texas? Not necessarily. I can't say everybody from the US is from Texas. But if you're from the US, you can say you're from North America. Notice I'm working my way out, but I can't work my way back in. So the idea is to use this for your numbers. A natural number is a whole number, which is also an integer, which is also rational, which is also real. But can I say an integer is a whole number? Can I work my way back in like that? No, I can't. So this little system of giving them sub-names is a little trick we use to help you know how the real number system works. But right here, I only want integers. So if you notice the numbers I have, like for example on A, -6, that's an integer. It's also rational. It's also real. But the whole point is that it is an integer. Now 5 is a natural number, which is also a whole, which is also a integer. Now 1.25. See, where do my decimals live? That's a rational. I can't work back into integers. So it can't be A, because I want something that only has integers. So if you go through all of these, the one that ends up having the right answer here is C. -8, 4, 13, and 25 are all integers. They live within that world. They live within that mark, within that circle. So like people from Edinburgh and Texas, they're all within the United States. So all natural and whole numbers are integers. Okay, and then here's the issues with the other ones. The other ones simply had rational numbers in there. All right, so keyword here is function. Now, here's the definition that I've given. It's a function is where every X kid has only one Y mom. Now, the original is just where every X has only one Y. But I use every X kid has only one Y mom to help you remember this. You should know that X kids cannot repeat. You cannot repeat. You cannot be born out of somebody else. But the Y moms, those can repeat. Meaning, can somebody else call your mom their mom? And yeah, if you have a sibling, that's possible. So it's a very simple concept. X cannot repeat, Y can. So you should know which are your X values, which are your Y values. So here's what I do. I go through my options and I just look at all my X values. Are any of those X values repeating? No. It's a function. So I go check the next one. Are any of these X values here repeating? No. It's a function. So check the next. Any of these X values repeating? No. It's a function. And is anything repeating on D? No. It's a function. So just notice you're like, oh, but I saw 3 and -3. Those are not the same numbers. They live in different spots on the number line. They're not the same. So it's like, oh, but what about this one? This is a -4, -4. Yeah, but I only talked about the X. The X value cannot repeat. In fact, whether the Y does or doesn't repeat, it doesn't matter. The Y can repeat. It doesn't have to. So like some people get confused by this. Oh, look, the 2 comes out. Like, look, it came out 2, 2, 2. Yeah, but that's a Y value. I don't care about the Y value. It can repeat. It doesn't have to repeat. So really when you're looking at a function where every X kid has only one Y mom, you're just going to pay attention to the X value. And since what I have here, all the X values are different. So my answer is D. All right, number 2. So what is the rate of change for the data? So big word there. So rate of change, also meaning unit rate, which also means rise over run, which also means slope, which also means the change in Y over the change of X. So how do I find this? Well, there's several ways to do this. I think one of the easier methods is just to do the change in Y over the change of X. This is, of course, if you're going to do it by hand. So what you got to do is you just got to subtract all your numbers. Now, the arrows are telling me which direction I'm doing in, but I'm subtracting. So like right here, what was 2 minus 1.5? 0.5. What was 3 minus 2? 1. What was 5 minus 3? 2. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. So what's 36 minus 27? 9. 54 minus 36? 18. What's 90 minus 54? 36. All right, so I have these numbers here. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to do the change in Y over the change of X. I need you all to be careful here. Notice how I'm labeling my X and my Y values. Some people get confused by this. If it helps you to look at your answer choices, miles per inch. It's always going to be Y over X. So my miles are my Y value and my inches are my X value. Typically, when you're given a table, it's always X on top, Y on the bottom. If you're given the table even standing, it could also be just X is on the left side, Y is on the right side. I don't want to stick with that every time because they could switch it, but that's typically how it is. Now, go do your change of Y over change of X. So careful, my first change of Y was 9 over 0.5, which is 18. Now go check the next one. What's 18 over 1? That's 18. And what's 36 over 2? That is also 18. So what is my rate of change? 18. I could have asked, what is the slope? And the answer would be 18. I could have asked, what's the unit rate? And then the answer would have been 18. So that word rate of change is interchangeable with those 4 other words. Okay, so that's something important to know. Now, again, just be careful if it's given to you like on the left and right, X and Y. And then I want to bring in a very popular method to help you check the rate of change from a table. It's called linear regression. Okay, that's the method we're going to be calling this. It's the button we go to. Basically, what this method does is it can solve any table for you. It can give any table into an equation. You just have to be careful because it only works if you know it is a linear relationship. And in the 8th grade, pretty much all your examples are linear, so it comes in very useful. I just don't want you guys to use this in high school where it's not intended. But in 8th grade, perfect method. So let me show you how linear regression works. Let me go ahead and reset the calculator. So what you need is you're going to give your calculator the data. So you're going to go to Stat, Edit, and List 1 will be for X values, and List 2 will be for Y values. So I'm going to go list all my X values. So it's 1.5235. So 1.5, enter, 2, enter, 3, enter, 5, enter. You're going to scroll to the side and you're going to go ahead and do the Y values now. So my Y values are 27, 36. Actually, was it 54? Oh, 54 and 90. Okay, here we go. 54, enter, 90, enter. Okay. All right, now once you got your data in there, you're going to go to Stat, scroll over to Calculate, and then here's why we call this the linear regression method. Okay, because there's a calculation option that means linear regression, and it says AX plus B here. We're going to be referring to it as an MX plus B. That way we know we're dealing with a non-proportional relationship. The reason it has the A is simply because of the standard form that you'll learn in algebra. But let's just stick with MX plus B, even though it says AX plus B. So I click on number 4, and notice I told you your X values are on list 1 and your Y values are on list 2. All you got to do now is press Calculate. Now, this gives you more information than you wanted. It also gives you a B value of 0, but you just have to know that when it is asking you for the rate of change, that is the slope. That is my M. In this case it says A, but my M is actually 18. My rate of change is 18. So that would have been another method to get my answer. It's all calculator work. It's good. It's good especially for those that struggle remembering all these steps by hand. For some reason, kids seem to be a lot better with technology. And since you have the calculator, use it. Okay. All right. Last one. Betty bought 15 muffins for $11.25 at the same rate, so the same unit rate or rate of change. How much would she pay for 20 muffins? So there's several different ways to do this. I'm just going to go with the basic one. What's my unit rate? How much does she pay per muffin? Notice, pay per muffin. So I could set up a proportion, but I'm just going to do a pay per muffin. So notice her pay was $11.25 for how many muffins? 15. That gives me $75 per muffin. If I know it costs $75 per muffin, at the same rate, how much is it for 20? Just do times 20. What's 0.75 times 20? 15. So my answer is there. That's it. If I set up a proportion, just be careful when you set it up. There's several different ways. I would go with that same idea. The pay per muffin. So you could have set it up like this. 1125 over 15 would have been how much for 20. And if you cross multiply and divide, you would end up with the same answer of $15. So keyword here, total surface area. And then if that wasn't enough, look at the answer choices that say feet squared. That's another hint that we're doing area. So I have a shipping crate, and for me it helps to draw it. So by the way, when you draw it, well, I guess you can tell a crate is going to be a rectangular prism. So the way you draw a prism is you draw the shape, so a rectangle, you draw the same shape on like kind of overlapping, and then you connect vertex to vertex. That's pretty much the idea behind any type of prism that you work with. And then this is a 9 by 4 by 6. So how do you do total surface area? So I would start off with the formula. pH plus 2b. And then we got to go figure out what are P, H, and B. So P stands for perimeter of the base. And then I taught you guys perimeter, add all sides. So I shaded my base. What's the perimeter of it? Well, what's 9 plus 9 plus 4 plus 4? So that's 18 plus 8, 26, I think. And then the height of the prism is going to be 6. And then what's the area of the base? Well, what's the area of a rectangle? Length times width. So what's 9 times 4? That gives me 36. So I have all the pieces I need to find the total surface area. Now all I got to do is substitute. So let me make some space. Alright, but sub it in. What is P, H plus 2B? So P we agreed was 26. The height was 6. And then plus 2 times area of the base. And that's what I need to go and type in. That's what I need to go and figure out what it's worth. So I go here, and I'm going to type in 26 times 6 plus 2 times 36. So there's pH plus 2b, but of course I substituted. And I'm looking for an answer of about 228. Which I didn't get. So maybe I'm a little bit off somewhere. And I don't believe I made a mistake anywhere, so it is a possibility, but the answer is D, not there. So my answer should be 228 feet squared. And it doesn't come out. So the answer is D. Alright. So, which statement is true? And so we're comparing and ordering here, so just keep in mind, when you use these inequality symbols, you should know which one means less, and makes kind of an L, and then which one makes a greater symbol. And then as far as the rest goes, it's just going to be a lot of typing in and getting those numbers. So just to be safe, I'll go ahead and type one in. So -5 plus the square root of 3. And the best advice I have is the way you say it is the way you type it. So -5 plus the square root of 3. And that will be the decimal value on that side. So here's -3.26 approximately. Is that greater than -3? And some people say, yes it is, but you should know this on a number line. So here's -3, and then here's -3 point something. This is actually, -3.26 is actually less than -3. You have to use a number line when you're comparing and ordering. So F is actually false. and I'm looking for true. So you keep on. So what's negative 1 plus pi? And again, the way you read it is the way you type it. So negative 1 plus pi is about 2.14. And then what's negative 3 plus the square root of 2? So if you go check that, you should end up with this. Is this true? Is 2.14 less than negative 1.58? And that would be false. Alright, so you go and check the other. So what's negative 7 plus pi? And I got 3.85. Negative 3.85. Now, this other one, I want to make sure we know how to type this in. So what's negative 5 plus the square root of 2 over 2? So negative 5 plus a fraction. So let's make sure we access the fraction key. So it was the square root of 2 over 2. Alright, so square root of 2. And then notice how depending on how you move the arrow, what it does to your parentheses, I guess, your little cursor, your blinker. That's anything about these updated calculators. You got the math print, makes it really convenient for you guys to use. And that is approximately negative 4.29. So, is this true? Is negative 3.85 greater than negative 4.29? And if you plug it on a number line, here's negative 3.85 and here's negative 4.29. The number line shows that negative 3.85 truly is greater. So H is true. And if you were to check J, you'd find out that it was false as well. Okay, so between the number line and your calculator, they should be very possible. So which statement is true about the two graphed equations? So I want a true, and then I want you to notice the key word in the answer choices, the intersection. So when you're working with two or more equations, we're going to call this the system of equations. And I'm going to do this by hand and then show you how to do this on the calculator. But for right now, I want you to graph the first one. So what's the slope and the y-intercept from the first equation? Well, the slope is negative 1.5. And the y-intercept is 7, which I'm going to put as 0, 7. And let's go start with the y-intercept. So here's 0, 7. And now I need the slope. So negative 1.5, you should know is the same as negative 3 over 2. So I'm going to use that as my rise over run. So just remember, if it's a negative slope, it needs to go downhill. So if I rise 3, 1, 2, 3, when I run 2, it needs to run so that my line will go downhill. So it's have to be like this. And I can keep on following that pattern until I run out of space. So this slope is showing a rise of negative 3 over 2. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and finish this off here. So here is a slope of negative 3 over 2, which is the same as negative 1.5. So my line will look something like this. Alright, so now it's time to graph the other line. So the other line has a y equals kx. I'm still going to put it as an m and b, but you should know that a proportional equation will cross the origin. So the b is just 0, 0. And the slope will be 2. Okay, so here's my 0, 0. And then I need a slope of 2, which is really the same as 2 over 1. So I'm going to rise 2, run 1, so that I'm going uphill. And then you can kind of already tell what happens there. I'll just go ahead and leave it at that. Alright, so what I'm looking for is the solution of a system of equations. That is going to be their intersection. These happen to intersect at 2, 4. So the answer I'm looking for is 2, 4. And only one of them has that solution. So my answer ends up being C. I do want y'all to be careful with A. Notice what they do. If you're bad at reading your coordinates, you might make that mistake, so be careful. And then here's a neat part. You can do all of this on the calculator. So for those of you that have trouble graphing by hand, you can always go and check this on the calculator. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's graph both equations. So the first one is, let's go to our y equals negative 1.5x plus 7. And then my second line is 2x. So notice you can see kind of where they cross, but it's not very, very easy to see. So there's a few things we can do. So one of the things I want to make sure you guys know is you can go to your second format, and you can change there from grid off to grid line, which I recommend. So when I go back to my graph, it looks like this now. You can see the grid line on the back. And I think that makes it a lot easier. You can even tell it looks like 2, 4, but we can do even better than that. All right, but I like to draw on the grid line. Now, even better would be to use calculate. No, not the calculate we got from stat, but there's another calculate up here on top on the graphing button. So we're going to press second calc. And you should see there option number 5 that says intersect. And all you got to do once you're there is just press enter 1, 2, 3 times. And it'll tell you there the intersection is x equals 2, y equals 4, 2, 4 is how we would read it. So the calculator is a really great feature. You just got to know how to get to your y equals, type it in, how to get to your graph. You could go straight to calculate, but I like to look at the graph first to get an idea that I'm doing it right. And notice that this graph does match our graph over here. So, what is the unit rate in pages per minute? Now, when I say the word unit rate, I want you to think of the words rise over run. That's one of the best methods to use on a graph. And then one way to do this is to do it by hand, is to go and find yourself your perfect points, which, if you remember, I told you are points that are on the line and the grid. So there are a few that I found. So simply count rise over run. You do need to be careful, though. Notice I did skip a point there. It doesn't matter which 2 points you use, but you have to use 2 perfect points. So just make sure you find the 2 perfect points. Now, for this example, I chose several sets, but here's the idea. When I said to be careful about this, it's because of your scales. So notice your Y scale. This one's going by ones. Now notice your X scale. This one's not going by ones. This one's actually going by, you can say by halves or by 0.5s, which makes you count differently. So what you see there on the grid is not what you have to count by. You have to count according by the scale. So when I count rise, my rise is 3, and I rise 1, 2, 3. I can count that. But your run, it looks like 2. However, because of the scale, it's really 0.5, 1. So you have to be careful with the scale. So my slope is really 3. I'm looking for 3 pages per minute. Now, what if I go with that bigger rise over run? Well, the rise would be 6, and the run, it looks like 4, but it's not. Remember to count by 0.5s. It's really 2. And notice that 6 over 2 is also 3. So it's actually the same thing, just so long as you get 2 perfect points. My slope ends up being 3. Now, some people struggle with this still. So there's one more option. Think of it as a last resort. Another option would be to use linear regression. Normally you use this for when you have a table of data, but in this case, you have a graph, and the graph has data. So one thing you could do is you can get at least 2 points. You can use more if you'd like, but at least 2 is what you would need. And you can put this data into the calculator and have the calculator solve it for you. So the way you do this is, let's go to our calculator. You're going to go to Stat, edit, and under list 1 you put your X values. So my X values, the ones that I found, were 1, 2, 3, 4. So pretty easy X values. 1, enter, 2, enter, 3, 4. Now under list 2, let's put our Y values. And I need to put them in the same order. So if I went 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm going to go 3, 6, 9, 12. So 3, 6, 9, 12. And then the rest of the steps are as follows. You got your data in, list 1, list 2. You're going to go to Stat, Calculate, and you'll choose option number 4, Linear Regression. AX plus B will mean MX plus B, and you'll scroll down and click Calculate. And this is my equation. So y equals 3x plus 0. I don't need the plus 0. In fact, I don't even have to say it. It's just y equals 3x. But that 3 is my slope. Or in this case, it is my unit rate. Okay, so that calculator method is pretty useful. Just don't overuse it. Okay, this one should have been able to be done by hand. Okay, so on this one, you have somebody selling yard art, and each item sells for 15, and it cost her 8 to make each item and 25 for her booth fee. And then it says which inequality. So this is an inequality, and it makes sense because you look at your answer choices and it shows it there too. So which inequality shows how many items you need to sell in order to make a profit. Profit's a big word. All right, so let's just make sure we know what an inequality is. Now, inequalities that deal with profit have two sides. Like any business, you have to have a side that talks about sales and a side that talks about cost. So what is it that it says about sales? And all we find is that she sells each item for 15. And every time it says each item, each thing, that's my X value. Okay, so it says each item sells for 15. That's going to be my X. She sells 15X. And then we go to cost. It goes on to say it cost her 8 to make each. So that would be 8X and a $25 booth fee. Notice it's not 25 for each. It's just a 25 for a booth fee. That's a one-time thing. So that's what represents the plus 25. Now right here is where we need to think about it a little bit. If you want to make a profit, one of these has to be greater than the other. So in a business, in order for you to be profitable, you want to have more sales or more costs. Think about that. If you want to actually make money, you have to have more sales. So I need sales to be greater than costs. So I'm noting it's not G. It's also not H. Notice the X's are in the wrong spots. But is it F or J? Which one means greater? So again, we'll go with that little trick. Less makes a little L. The greater than symbol makes a little G, or a capital G. And I'll be going with F. Okay. So I want them from longest to shortest. So from longest to shortest, that can mean greatest to least. That is going to be sort. What's greatest to least? Descending. So think of the plane going down. Now, you could use a number line here. You could do this by hand. There's plenty of ways to do this. I don't think I've shown the sort feature, so I'll go ahead and use that sort feature. Here's how this works. Let's go to our calculator, and let's go ahead and use the stat edit feature again. So I'm going to reset it again. Second plus 7 1 2, and I'm going to go to stat. It takes a while. Okay, there you go. Stat edit, and let's go ahead and type in my numbers. Luckily, all the answer choices have the same numbers. They're just in different orders. So alpha F1 number 2. So it's 18 and 1/2. The good thing is this leaves it in the same order. So there's Don't need to worry about the font that's going to change or anything. So I need 18 3/4. So we have 19 1/2. There you go. And finally we have 18 3/8. 18 3/8. Alright. Now, right now the way they are is they're just in the first answer choice that came out, which I already know something is off, because if I want them from longest to shortest, the longest has got to be 19, so that one should be in the front. In fact, if I were to look at my answer choices, if 19 is the biggest number, it for sure can't be A. Okay, but for the sake of this example, I used answer choice A. Now, all I got to do now is, let's go to the home screen. Let's go back to stat. Notice though that there's sort A and sort D. If I wanted longest to shortest, we would agreed that that meant descending. So I'm going to choose sort D. And then here, I'm going to have to type in list 1, because that's where I saved my data. Now behind the number 1, in blue, there's L1. So I need to activate my blue key. So I'll press second and then 1. And there we go. Now, you could just press L1 again, and you can see my answers there, but notice that it changed them to improper for me. So I'm just going to go back to stat edit, and this time my answers will be in descending order. So I'm looking for 19 1/2, then 18 3/4, then 18 1/2, and then 18 3/8. And the answer that has that there is D. Now, if you were to change them all to decimals, it would also be kind of easy to do that and just use a number line. There's no problem with that. In fact, that's probably the better method to use. All right, here we go. So here we have an equation that you got to solve for. So what is the cost of the dress? So every time it says cost of dress, that is going to be my X value. So it says 40% of X is the same as half of X decreased by 30. So if you were to write this, 40%, if you remember, percent is always por cien, so I can leave it like that. Or if you want to put 0.40, that would mean the same thing, but 40 over 100 is the same. So 40 over 100x is the same as, equals, half of x decreased by 30, which will mean minus 30. So what is x? What is the cost of the dress? 3 ways to solve this. There's by hand, there's on the calculator, which I'm actually going to refer to as solver, and then there is substitution. Now the answer ends up being 3. So what I want to do is I want to show you for sure at least solver and sub. And here is sub, because I think this is one of the easier methods. So the way you use this method is you're simply just going to, so 40 out of 100. Now I wish I had left it as 0.40, but that's fine. 40 over 100. X. Now, I'm telling you that X is 300, so I gave you the answer just to save some time. But what does this give me? It gives you 120. So it's the cost of the dress must have been 120. Now, is that the same as the other side? The other side said half X. So half of 300. And then it says decreased by 30. So if I take away 30, is that the same? Yes, it is. So that must mean that the cost of the dress is 120. Or no, the cost of the dress, I'm sorry, is 300. So what is the value of X? 300. Alright, so that's substitution. And then another very, even more popular method to solve this is going to be with solver. So it would be 40 out of 100 x, and what was it? Oh, that's it. Equals 1/2 x minus 30. So that's on the other side though. So go to E2, and that's where you'll type in your 1/2 x minus 30. Alright, so I'll press enter. Now notice this is not the answer, 0. You have to actually press solve. That's going to be alpha enter, but I do want to point this out. It's a good idea to always check that your equation that you have there matches the equation that you wrote. Otherwise, this is of no use. You have to make sure you've typed it incorrect in order for it to solve it. And notice that when I press alpha enter, 300 comes out. The value of x, the cost of the dress, is 300. Okay, so you have that method there as well. Okay. Alright, so over here there's a typo, so I just crossed it out. But here's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for two integers that are not whole numbers, two that are rational numbers and not integers, and two rational numbers. I feel like that's still worded wrong. Two integers that were not that are not whole, two that were rational that were not integers, okay, and two that were rational. Okay, all right. So either way, with the vocabulary it's talking about in here, what would really help is if you knew your real number system. So it's composed of two basic parts. You have a rational side, and then you have an irrational side. And then we should be familiar with counting, which leads us to whole, which leads us to integers, which then leads us to rational. So I need two integers that are not whole numbers. So I need just two integers. That's going to include positives and negatives. But actually, I need them to just be negatives, because if they're positives, then they're whole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this, and I'm going to label what's been given. So there I have two integers. On the next one I have two integers. On the next one I have only one integer, so it's not G. And on J I have only one integer, so it's not J. Alright, now I need to go and find two rational that are not integers. So two rationals, that's going to include my decimals, my fractions, my percents, but they can't be integers. So they can only be decimals, fractions, percents. So if I'm looking at F, there's a rational and there's a rational. So I have two rationals there. And then if I look at H, there's a decimal, and then careful, it looks like there's a rational, but it's actually 24 over 12 is just 2. So I only have one rational. That leaves me with only one possible option. Now, if I go check the rest, and it says, and 2 were rational. But you're thinking, oh, but 6 and 11 are counting numbers, whole numbers, and integers. Yes, but if you remember, you can work your way out and not back in. So even though 11 is a counting, which is a whole, which is an integer, it is also a rational. So the answer is F. It has two numbers that are rational. And it doesn't say that they can't be whole or counting or anything else. So my answer would be F. Alright, so which equation represents this? Alright, there's a lot of ways to solve this. There's sub, which I think is going to be the easiest method. You could go find the slope, which would be change in y over change of x. I'd be careful though, because it could be that the answer is not there and you might not be sure. So because of D, I wouldn't recommend that one. And then you could also try linear regression, which is probably the easiest method. Another method that I haven't practiced so much is going to be y equals table. Okay, so you got a couple of calculator options here that would be good for us to use. So let's try it. I guess really quickly. This doesn't require a lot of thought. Just try it with sub. So all that does is you just plug in a number where it goes. So, for example, if I get this x value, I just plug it into the x's. So, like, what's 1 times 1? 1, and then plus 5 is 6. And notice that is the value I wanted to get. If I keep on going, try the 3. What's 1 times 3? It's 3 plus 5. That's 8. However, though, it's supposed to give me 12. So it's not going to be A. If I try it for the next one, let's plug in the 1. 2 times 1 is 2, plus 4 is 6. That works. Plug in the 3. 2 times 3 is 6. Plus 4 is 10. So it doesn't work. It was supposed to give me 12. So it's also not B. So if I check C, just 3 times 1 is 3, plus 3 is 6. That works. Plug in the 3 now. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12. That worked. Plug in the 4. 3 times 4 is 12, plus 3 is 15. Okay. Plug in the 5. 3 times 5 is 15, plus 3 is 18. So notice it worked for all of them. So sub is an easy method. Now if I used linear regression, I think it's one of the more popular methods. You simply just go to Stat, Edit, and let's go ahead and clear out this data, and let's use list 1 for the x values. So 1, 3, 4, 5. Or actually, you only need 2 sets of data, 2 points, 2 coordinates for this to work. So I can use 1 and 3, and then 6 and 12. So let's use 1, 6, and 3, 12. And then all you got to do is stat calculate number 4. And this will take me to an equation. And so I'm looking for a 3x plus 3. So that's another way to prove that the answer is C. So sub works, linear regression works, and then finally here's y equals table. You're going to have to put all of your equations into the calculator for this one to work. So the first one was x plus 5. Then it was 2x plus 4. And then we have 3x plus 3. And then D is not here, so we don't put anything for that. But instead of pressing the graph, what I want us to do is press second graph. So we go to the table. Now, this looks a little bit weird, but it should be pretty easy to read. The black here is all the x values, and then the y are the corresponding values according to the equation. So notice the first one is 0, 5, but let's look at 1, because we have a 1 value. When x is 1, y is 6. So notice it works for all 3 of them. So that doesn't really help me there. But let's go look for when x is 3. So it's 3, 8, or 3, 10, or 3, 12. And of those points, only one of the points has the actual value. It would be y's of 3. So let's keep on checking. So when x is 4, y is 15, that works. And when x is 5, y is 18, that also works. So notice these points right here work for all of them. So my third equation would be my answer. So if I go back to y equals, my third equation is 3x plus 3. So the y equals table is also a good method to use as well. Okay. All right, so I recommend sub and linear regression. Although y equals table is pretty convenient, but I think those other two are pretty easy to use.